In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He had 3 ships and left from Spain. He sailed through sunshine, wind and rain. In doing so, he came across a verdant paradise, with friendly, hospitable inhabitants. He returned to Europe with news of the discovery, and so the course of history changed forever. The many thousands of soldiers that came to the Americas did so to claim it in the name of God, bringing with them an unquenchable lust for gold and riches to be felt in the New World. In the process, nobodies became conquerors, and conquerors became nobodies. Kingdoms turned into empires, and empires turned into dust. Part 1. Kingdoms and Empires. Amongst the major European colonizers that would rise to prominence in the 16th and 17th centuries, Portugal was already ahead of the curve. Portugal's rise to maritime dominance before 1492 was a deliberate, strategic endeavor fueled by ambition, determination, and religious zeal. The Portuguese, driven by a crusading spirit, embarked on a quest to secure trading routes threatened by the encroaching Ottoman Turks. In 1415, the Portuguese conquered the port city of Ceuta at a heavy cost in both men and money. Ceuta was an important trade hub on the northern Moroccan coast, and was a major outlet for African goods, especially gold. The port of Ceuta was also located on the strategically important Strait of Gibraltar, which was the Mediterranean Sea's only outlet to the rest of the world's oceans. Portugal also wanted part of the Mediterranean trade, and controlling Ceuta would be vital for such an endeavor. The conquest of Ceuta marked the birth of the Portuguese Empire. Prince Henrique, the third son of King John I, spearheaded Portugal's Age of Discovery. Fueled by a desire to discover the source of African gold and establish trade routes bypassing Islamic territories towards the south, he led a series of expeditions down the West African coast. Prince Henrique was also enamored by a crusading spirit. By traveling down the African coast, he hoped to contact Prester John, a semi-mythical Christian king in either Africa or India. With the help of Prester John, his forces and the soldiers of Christian Europe could attack the Muslims in a pincer movement. Prince Henrique revolutionized seafaring with the invention of the caravel, a vessel adept at navigating treacherous waters. Inspired by Muslim boats, caravels used triangular lateen sails instead of square-shaped sails, which made them highly maneuverable. Portuguese caravels, after reaching their desired latitude, would then sail far west, into the open ocean in order to catch the proper winds that would allow the ships to return home. The Portuguese called this technique the Volta do Mar, the return from the sea. With these ships, Prince Henrique discovered the Madeira and Azores Islands, pushing beyond the ominous Cape Bojador into the unknown. As Portuguese sailors and traders inched their way down the African coast, each milestone brought with them closer to their ultimate goal. Along the way, they traded textiles, wine, and firearms for gold, salt, and slaves. With these African slaves, the Portuguese began growing a plantation economy on the newly settled islands, focusing on harvesting sugarcane. The establishment of fortified trading posts called victorias, or factories, along the African coast acted as trading and resupply points, as well as launch pads for further conquest. Prince Henrique died in 1460, but the voyages continued. By 1488, Bartholomew Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope in modern-day South Africa, opening the possibility of reaching India by sea. Like its neighbors, Portugal was the product of the Reconquista. By 1492, the 800-year-old Reconquista, or Reconquest, was nearing its end. During that time, however, the Christians in the north of the Iberian Peninsula was embroiled in a centuries-old relentless push southward, engaging in territorial skirmishes against the Muslims, while simultaneously contending with internal strife. The initial kingdoms of Leon, Asturias, and Galicia were gradually absorbed by the Kingdom of Castile. The Basque Kingdom of Navarre occupied a minor position along the modern-day Spanish and French border. In the eastern half of the peninsula was the Kingdom of Aragon, which commanded a powerful Mediterranean empire with significant footholds in southern Italy. In the mid-15th century, Castile, ruled by King Enrique, faced uncertainty over succession, with rumors swirling about the legitimacy of his daughter Juana's claims to the throne. Enrique's half-sister, Isabella, had married the heir to the Kingdom of Aragon, Ferdinand of Aragon, in 1479, while Juana was the wife of Alfonso V, the King of Portugal. The ensuing 4-year War of the Castilian Succession culminated in Isabella's triumph over Juana, and the consolidation of her rule alongside Ferdinand. The Treaty of Alhambra also saw Castile gain the Canary Islands off the coast of Morocco, which Portugal was disputing ownership over since the 14th century. In 1492, Iberia stood on the brink of a new era, poised to leave an indelible mark on the world stage. The seeds of a global transformation were now sown, destined to bear fruit in the vast expanse of the New World. In the New World, the Americas were home to several indigenous civilizations. Chief amongst them were the Aztecs, who formed their empire in the heart of modern-day central Mexico. The Mexica, as the Aztecs called themselves, were the product of a centuries-long migration from the semi-mythical homeland of Aztlan in northwest Mexico, eventually settling in the Valley of Mexico in the 13th century. They founded their capital, Tenochtitlan, on a marshy island amidst Lake Texcoco, sometime in the 14th century. Despite the difficult terrain, the Aztecs harnessed the island's defensive advantages and constructed causeways and canals to navigate the lake's expanse. Despite initial subservience to neighboring city-states, the Aztecs freed themselves from their former masters and formed the Triple Alliance, comprising of the city-states of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. This confederation marks the birth of the Aztec state, fueled by a shared vision and the spoils of conquest. Under the leadership of indelible figures like Moctezuma I, Axayacatl, and Ahuizotl, the Aztec Empire bloomed, extending its dominion from the Pacific coast to Guatemala, and building a large network of city-state vassals by extracting tribute along the way. Despite their prowess, they made fierce rivals out of the Mixtec, Tlaxcalan, and the Purepecha, who each steadfastly resisted Aztec incursions. Alongside traditional conquest, the Aztecs engaged in enigmatic ritual warfare, known as flower wars. Spirituality and religion permeated every facet of Aztec life, manifesting in a complex pantheon of gods and goddesses. Central to their beliefs was Huitzilopochtli, the patron deity of Tenochtitlan and god of the sun and war. The Aztecs practiced ritualistic sacrifice, a violent and bloody demonstration of their fervent devotion to their gods. The flower wars were waged by the Aztecs to bring home prisoners of war to become human offerings. By the 1400s, Tenochtitlan grew into one of the world's most prosperous metropolises. It boasted a population numbering into the hundreds of thousands. The city supported countless pyramids, markets, gardens, and public spaces, all painted in bright, vivid colors. But despite the wealth and power concentrated in the imperial capital, the Aztecs were surrounded by furious enemies and disgruntled vassals who would be happy to rise up and overthrow the Aztecs should the opportunity arise. The second major empire in the Americas was the Inca Empire. Stretching from Chile in the south to Colombia in the north, it carved out the largest empire in the Americas by 1492, ruling over 10 million subjects. Like the Aztecs, the origins of the Inca lie in myth and mystery. Legends tell of Manco Capac, a figure who led his people to the site of modern-day Cusco in Peru sometime in the 12th century, where they laid the foundation of their future greatness. Whether he turned his brothers into stone or was born as the Incan sun god Inti remains uncertain. Nonetheless, Manco Capac, whether legend or flesh, stands as the progenitor of the Inca, who Christians their empire Tawantinsuyo. Amidst the shadows of neighboring powers, the newborn Inca state struggled to assert its presence. Most of the kingdom's efforts in its early days were put towards simply surviving, building terrace farms along the slopes of the Andes. While small conquests punctuated the centuries, it would be 2 long centuries before the Inca would shatter the confines of their valley. It took until the looming threat of the Chanca in the 1430s for the Inca to awaken. Cusiupanqui emerged as the savior of Cusco, earning the title Panchacuti, the Earthshaker. With the defeat of the Chanca, the Inca set their sights on a grander stage. Pachacuti's successors, Tupac Inca Yupanqui and then Huayna Capac, made sure that the Inca banner unfurled across the Andes, unstoppable in its conquest from southern Colombia to central Chile. In 1527, Huayna Capac died of a mysterious foreign illness. So too did his eldest son and heir apparent, Nyancoyochi. The next in line was Huáscar, one of Huayna Capac's youngest sons. The Inca nobility in Cusco crowned him the next Samba Inca, or emperor. Meanwhile, in the northern administrative capital of Quito, his half-brother Atahualpa was considered a more capable warrior and proved administrator, and was crowned a Samba Inca by his supporters. However, Atahualpa was the son of the Inca emperor and one of his concubines. His legitimacy to the throne was questionable at best and non-existent at worst. A crisis was brewing. Part 2. The year 1492. The year 1492 is a turning point in European history, and world history in general. It was also a turning point for the Spanish kingdoms, for it arguably marked their beginning. Firstly, the year 1492 was important for Spain, because it was the last year of the Reconquista. In 1479, the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon were dynastically united under the bold, joint rule of the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. Also by 1479, the political Muslim presence had been reduced to the mountainous Emirate of Granada along the southern coast of the peninsula. It had been this way for some 2 centuries by this point. Within the Emirate of Granada, a rising tide of xenophobia among the Muslim populace gave birth to a lethal intolerance towards the few and far-reaching Christians who dwelled within Granada's borders, providing the Catholic monarchs with a righteous cause, the defense of Christians dwelling within the Emirate. In 1481, Emir Abul Hassan Ali ceased paying tribute to Castile and seized the border town of Zahara de la Sierra as reprisal for an earlier Christian raid. The subsequent war became known as the Granada War. Ferdinand and Isabella rallied support from across Christendom, marshalling resources, manpower, and finances to launch the last Spanish Crusade. Contributions poured in from various parties, including Jewish sources and Genoese financiers in Seville, while volunteers from across Europe bolstered the Castilian ranks. The strategic Alhambra de Granada was captured in 1482. A failed counter-siege spurred Ferdinand to take command of the Christian armies. Internal discord within Granada further weakened Muslim resistance. Abu Abdallah, the son of Abu Hassan, rebelled in 1482, stylizing himself as Emir Muhammad XII. Muhammad was captured by Ferdinand's army and released on the condition that Granada would be a vassal to Castile. The tide turned decisively in favor of the Christians as they capitalized on Granada's internal turmoil. Christian forces, led by Rodrigo Ponce de León, swiftly advanced, seizing key territories and besieging strategic strongholds. The siege of Malaga in 1487 was an especially bloody engagement. Unhappy with what he was left with to administer in Granada, Muhammad formally broke off his vassalage and rebelled against the Catholic monarchs in 1490. The capital city of Granada was besieged in 1491, resulting in a protracted campaign culminating in the city's surrender in January 1492. Muhammad's reluctant capitulation marks the end of Muslim rule in Spain, as the Catholic monarchs entered the Alhambra. After 800 long years, the Iberian Peninsula was now a solely Christian peninsula. (1492) was also an important year in Spanish history because of what came soon after the conquest of Granada. Queen Isabella, driven by her unwavering devotion to Catholicism, began the Spanish Inquisition in 1478. The Inquisition was negligently enforced until the Muslim defeat in Granada in 1492. Queen Isabella perceived the Inquisition as a tangible expression of her profound allegiance to Catholicism. Subsequently, on March 31, 1492, Queen Isabella enacted the Alhambra Decree, also known as the Edict of Expulsion. This decree ordained the expulsion of practicing Jews from the crowns of Castile and Aragon and their associated territories and domains by July 31st of the same year. The decree's principal aim was to eradicate the influence of practicing Jews on Spain's extensive population of new Christians who had converted from Judaism and Islam under duress. These conversions followed religious persecution starting in 1391, with over half of Spain's Jewish populace embracing Christianity. By 1415, around 50,000 more had converted, while others opted for conversion to evade expulsion. Consequently, of Spain's estimated 300,000 Jews, over 200,000 had converted to Catholicism to maintain residency, while between 40,000 and 100,000 endured expulsion. The Alhambra Decree put an abrupt end to public Jewish life and culture in Spain. The third and final reason for 1492 being one of the most monumental years in history, Christopher Columbus's voyage to the New World. But who was Christopher Columbus?
He discovered America is what he did. He was a brave Italian explorer, and in this house, Christopher Columbus is a hero. End of story.
Traditionally, Christopher Columbus is believed to have been born in 1451 to a family of wool growers in a village near Genoa, the bustling maritime hub and capital of the Republic of Genoa, a prosperous Italian state renowned for its extensive trading networks. As a merchant hailing from this republic, Columbus was no stranger to travel. His early adulthood was purportedly spent traveling Europe, engaging in trade and exploration. He is said to have ventured to Britain, Greece, and West Africa, honing his seafaring skills along the way. With familial ties to Lisbon and matrimonial connections to a prominent Genoese trading family based in Madeira, Columbus had the means and the skills to push his grand vision forward. All he needed was the money. With the fall of Constantinople in 1453, Europe faced the imminent risk of being cut off from vital connections to the east, especially the spice trade. Spices from India and modern-day Indonesia were a valuable ingredient in helping the preservation and flavor of food, as well as medicine in Europe. By the time the spices reached Europe, the cost of transporting them such a long way made it expensive. The spice was still valuable enough for kings and merchants to want to pay the price. Portugal had been trying to find a direct route to India since Prince Enrique's first voyages to fix this issue. In 1484, Columbus began to seek support from the Portuguese king, King John II, to seek a passage to the Orient. Instead of traveling south down the coast of Africa, Columbus would sail directly west, across the Atlantic. According to his calculations, Columbus believed the Earth's size to be around 73% of what it actually is. The end of Spain and the beginning of India are not far distant, he wrote. This sea can be crossed in a few days with a fair wind. King John's councillors dismissed Columbus due to his poor calculations. Another factor is that Portugal was already working on a route to India. Bartholomew Diaz would round the Cape of Good Hope only 4 years after Columbus's first meeting with King John. Attempting an entirely different route could be too costly, with little or no return on investment. So, Columbus instead went to the Catholic monarchs. Spain emerged as a promising ally for Columbus, eager to rival Portugal's dominance and eager to carve its own trading routes. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand's decision to back Columbus in April 1492 coincided with the culmination of Spain's Reconquista and the expulsion of Jews from its territory. Columbus, leveraging Isabella's devout piety and promising to replenish Spain's coffers, secured their support. The financial burden of Columbus' voyage was minimal for the Spanish crowns, with the cost only a tiny fraction of lavish expenditures such as royal weddings. Utilizing borrowed funds and commandeering available vessels, Columbus assembled his fleet, the Nina, the Pinta, and his flagship, the Santa Maria. Setting sail from Spain in August 1492, Columbus embarked on his journey. Armed with rudimentary navigation tools, he charted a westward course, guided by celestial observations and the trade winds of the Atlantic. Despite initial optimism, morale among Columbus's crew waned as weeks passed without sighting land. Skepticism and dissent among the sailors intensified, exacerbated by tensions with the Pinta's captain, Martin Alonso Pizan. On October 12, 1492, after weeks of relentless pursuit, Columbus's perseverance was rewarded when land finally appeared on the horizon. Stepping on the shore, he raised banners adorned with a green cross and the initials of Spain's monarchs, claiming the land in their name. Columbus called it San Salvador, or Holy Savior. According to one account, he and his men then knelt to kiss the sand, thanking God, who had recruited them after a voyage so long and strange. Columbus was the first European to come across Americas since Leif Erikson landed in Newfoundland in the year 1000. Columbus had landed in the modern-day Bahamas, off the coast of Florida, but Columbus believed he had landed in Asia, as he expected. Because of this, he called the local Arawak people who surrounded him Indios, or Indians. The name stuck. "I cannot get over the fact of how docile these people are," Columbus wrote. "They ought to make good and skilled servants. After they learn our language, I shall return them, unless your highnesses order that the entire population be taken to Castile, or held captive here. With 50 men, you could subject everyone, and make them do what you wished." Columbus departed the Bahamas with 7 captives to bring to the king and queen, and headed for the island of Cuba, which he was told was rich in gold and spices. His indigenous captives warned him of people called cannibals, or Caribs, who had the faces of dogs and one eye in the middle of their foreheads. After no gold, Columbus then headed for an island east of Cuba that he called the Spanish Island, or Hispaniola, where locals told him of a place called Cibao that was rich with gold. To Columbus, the name Cibao sounded close enough like Chipango, the name given to Japan by Marco Polo, to convince him that he finally reached Japan. After his flagship, the Santa Maria, was right off the coast on Christmas Eve, his men took the wood from the ship and built a fort named La Navidad. Columbus then sailed back to Spain, leaving 39 men to guard the fort until his second voyage. Christopher Columbus' second voyage, undertaken in 1493, marked a significant departure from his initial expedition. Elevated to the status of a Spanish noble, and commanding a formidable fleet of 17 vessels carrying 1,200 passengers, Columbus embarked on a grandiose mission to extract riches from Hispaniola while also spreading Christianity among its inhabitants. His colony at La Navidad had failed, and all of its residents were killed. His new colony of La Isabela was its successor. Columbus's inadequacies as a leader became evident as conflicts with the indigenous people grew, and his focus on exploration dimmed amidst growing discontent and disorder within the new colony. In 1498, Columbus embarked on his third voyage, venturing farther into uncharted waters, but facing mounting challenges and diminishing returns, struggling with navigation errors and grappling with internal strife on Hispaniola. Columbus's reputation suffered irreparable damage. Despite continued attempts to secure support and vindicate his legacy, Columbus faced opposition from the crown and was ultimately stripped of his governorship. His fourth and final voyage in 1500 culminated in disaster, with shipwrecks and marooning in Jamaica further tarnishing his once illustrious career. Columbus died in May 1506. Part 3. Welcome to the New World. When Christopher Columbus returned to Europe in 1493, the news of his discovery of a new road to Asia spread like wildfire. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella sought to assert Spanish dominance over these newfound routes and thwart potential European competitors, especially the Portuguese. The Catholic monarchs appealed to Pope Alexander VI, who was Spanish himself, and he issued a pivotal papal bull the same year. This papal bull delineated a division line through an imaginary demarcation running north to south just west of the Cape Verde Islands. This proclamation assigned territories west of the line to Spain and those to the east to Portugal, with the stipulation that any newly discovered Christian realms, like those of Prester John, would remain sovereign. However, dissatisfaction arose from both parties regarding the precise location of the line. The ensuing diplomatic negotiations resulted in the signing of the Treaty of Tordesillas on June 7, 1494. This treaty maintained the essence of the original papal decree, but shifted the demarcation line further west, approximately 1,800 kilometers from Cape Verde. Despite its imprecision, the treaty delineated in rough spheres of influence. Essentially, Spain was given most of the New World, and Portugal was given most of the Old World. However, local indigenous people and their nations were not given a say at all. As mentioned before, Columbus did not land in Asia, but in America. Still, he nonetheless claimed that he landed in Asia. However, it would be his friend Amerigo Vespucci who would prove him wrong. Amerigo Vespucci was a Florentine merchant with ties to the influential Medici family. He established himself in Seville, where he organized and financed voyages across the Atlantic. His expeditions, undertaken between 1499 and 1502 under Spanish and Portuguese patronage, purportedly aimed at discovering new trade routes to the Indies. Despite Vespucci's claims of navigational prowess, his true talent lay in embellishment and self-promotion. Vespucci claimed that he supposedly arrived in South America in 1497, predating Columbus's third voyage, allegedly going as far south as Argentina. He dubbed the newly discovered lands as a New World, distinct from the known continents of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Because of his revelation that the land that Columbus came across were, in fact, not Asia, Martin Waldseemüller, a German geographer, immortalized Vespucci's name by labeling the newfound continent America on his world map, the feminine version of his first name Amerigo. Even today, Vespucci's legacy endures as the namesake of the vast continents of North and South America. Up until 1500, the Portuguese were focused on their African and Asian expeditions. After Bartholomew Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, it wouldn't be long until the Portuguese would land in Asia. Vasco da Gama was the first to successfully and actually land in India in 1498, firmly entrenching Portugal's interests in the eastern trade routes. In April 1500, the fleet of Pedro Alvarez Cabral, 13 ships strong and en route to India, veered off course trying to chase favorable trade winds. What he came across instead was new land. He anchored his ships near Monte Pascoal, at a site he called Porto Seguro, halfway down the coast of modern-day Brazil. He met the local Tupi people, a hunter-gatherer society. The Portuguese sought to impart their Catholic beliefs on the Tupi. A makeshift mass conducted on the beach on the 10th and last day of the Portuguese visit saw the curious Tupi try to mimic and make sense of the ceremony. One of Cabral's men, Perez de Camino, wrote that these people were like Adam and Eve, before Satan had tempted them into eating the forbidden fruit and gaining knowledge, and that this land that the Tupi inhabited was like the Garden of Eden. Upon departure, Cabral left behind a rudimentary settlement and 2 individuals, 2 criminals sentenced to exile. More expeditions in the following years, spearheaded by Gonzalo Coelho, generated more knowledge about the region. Notably, Amerigo Vespucci was aboard at least one of these expeditions, which allowed him to build up more evidence that the New World was indeed new. It was during these expeditions that the discovery of a tree yielding a lucrative red dye led to the christening of both the tree and the land as Brazil. However, despite these initial incursions, Portugal's endeavors in Brazil remained primarily superficial. It would not be until 1530, nearly 3 decades later, that concerted efforts toward establishing permanent settlements in Brazil began. Spain was also making its first forays in the American mainland starting in the 1500s. Born into the minor nobility of Extremadura, Spain, Vasco Núñez de Balboa embarked on his journey to the Americas in 1500, joining other Spanish expeditions in search of pearls along the uncharted coast of modern-day Colombia. Despite initial setbacks, Balboa's resilience led him to Hispaniola, where his entrepreneurial endeavors and plantation ownership faltered. This compelled him to seek new opportunities on the mainland. In 1510, Balboa boarded a vessel bound for the fledgling Spanish colony of Ruaba. Recognizing the inherent leadership vacuum, Balboa swiftly asserted himself as a commanding presence and usurped Martin of Fernandez de Encil as the governor of the region. Balboa battled away deadly indigenous attacks with Spanish steel, gunpowder weapons, and attack dogs. Balboa established Santa Maria la Antigua de Darien, the first permanent Spanish settlement on the American mainland. He wrote to Spain of Panama's supposed abundance of gold, where the indigenous people had gold growing like maize in their huts, which they collect in baskets. Balboa's tenure in Darien epitomized the ruthless pursuit of wealth and power characteristic of Spanish conquistadors. He subjugated indigenous populations, exploiting their labor and resources to fuel his ambitions. Balboa's thirst for riches and glory led him to orchestrate expeditions deep into the Panamanian wilderness, driven by tantalizing rumors of a great sea to the southwest, and more intriguing rumors of the Golden Kingdom far to the south. Realizing he now had to make good on these exaggerated descriptions of the wealth of the region, Balboa organized an expedition to explore more of Panama and find out if there really was another sea not too far away in late 1513. A fellow conquistador, Francisco Pizzaro, was appointed his second in command, and the two, alongside 200 conquistadors and 1,000 indigenous slaves, reached the coast before September was over. While Balboa was busy exploring, a new governor of Darien was appointed, Pedro Davila. Encil, whom Balboa had usurped as governor, told of Balboa's abuses. Eventually, Pedro ordered Balboa's arrest in 1519, charged with treason. Francisco Pizzaro was ordered to bring in Balboa, who was then tried, found guilty, and executed by beheading in January. Another notable character in this very early period of conquest is Juan Ponce de León. Juan Ponce de León was born in 1474 in the Valladolid region of Spain. Raised in affluence and grouped as a royal page at the Aragonese court, he later honed his skills as a knight, contributing to the Spanish conquest of Granada. However, his aspirations propelled him towards the uncharted territories of the New World, and he joined Christopher Columbus' second voyage in 1493. Ponce de León's path led him to Hispaniola in 1493, where he settled under the governorship of Nicolas de Ovando. Ponce de León established himself in Puerto Rico by 1508, claiming the land for Spain. There, he subjugated the indigenous Taino people and laid the groundwork for Spanish dominance in the region. After his governorship was taken over by Diego Columbus in 1511, the eldest son of Christopher Columbus, Ponce de León was instructed to secure the island of Bimini in the western part of the Bahamas. In March 1513, Ponce de León embarked on a privately funded expedition to explore the region. Navigating the waters with a small fleet, he reached the shores of what is now known as Florida, marking the first documented European landing in the region. Impressed by its verdant landscapes, he named the area La Florida, in honor of the abundance of flora observed during their arrival on Easter Sunday. As he traversed the coastline, Ponce de León encountered the enigmatic phenomenon of the Gulf Stream, the swift ocean current that facilitates maritime navigation and trade routes along the eastern seaboard. Despite rumors that Ponce de León was driven by a quest to find the mythical Fountain of Youth, a magical spring of water that provided eternal life if one drank from its waters, his endeavors were driven by more practical motives of exploration and territorial expansion. His return to Puerto Rico in October 1513 heralded triumph and recognition from the Spanish crowns, culminating in his appointment as Captain General of Bimini and Florida. Ponce de León embarked on a second voyage to Florida in 1521, aiming to establish the first Spanish colony in the region. After encountering fierce resistance from indigenous peoples, his vision of colonization was cut short by a fatal skirmish. The French Huguenots would ultimately be the first to establish the first European settlements in the 1560s. Part 4. The Conquest of Mexico. Out of the many thousands of Spanish conquistadors who scoured the Americas in search of gold, none of them are as famous as Hernán Cortés. Born in 1485 in Extremadura, Spain, Hernán Cortés hailed from a lineage of the petty nobility, his father being an hidalgo. Choosing to forsake his legal studies at the University of Salamanca in 1499, Cortés, at the age of 19, ventured into the Caribbean colonies, where he ran a plantation in eastern Hispaniola. Eager for grandeur, by 1511, he had embroiled himself in the conquest of Cuba, driven by not merely the lure of riches, but also by fervent religious convictions, fueling his zeal to expand the dominion of Christianity in the New World. In 1517, under the command of Diego Velázquez de Cuellar, the governor of Cuba, Cortés spearheaded several reconnaissance expeditions to the mainland coast of America, who brought back reports of enigmatic stone buildings and indigenous peoples dressed head to toe in grand attire, suggestive of untold riches. Convinced by these stories, Velázquez dispatched another expedition to find the source of these stories, to be led by Hernán Cortés. With 11 ships, ferrying 500 soldiers and 100 sailors, each of them a fortune seeker and adventurer just like Cortés, he embarked on a voyage teeming with promise and peril. Despite Velázquez's last-minute attempt to recall Cortés, the die was cast. Before diving into the exploits of one of the greatest conquistadors of all time, it is important to look into what a conquistador actually is. Conquistadors, translated as conquerors, were the soldiers of Spain and Portugal, responsible for conquering and subjugating the Americas under Iberian rule. The conditions that propelled the conquistadors were deeply rooted in the historical context of medieval Spain and the culmination of their centuries-long Reconquista. The Reconquista was not only a war for territory, but also for religious zealotry, fame, and wealth. During those 800 long years, Spain became a breeding ground for generations upon generations of battle-hardened men, burning with red-hot passion for Christ and a desire to take back the lands of the infidel. However, with the conquest of Granada in 1492, these crusaders were suddenly unemployed. The wars in Italy provided an immediate outlet, but only an immediate one. When news of the New World reached Europe, these men now had a massive sandbox to explore and conquer. Many of the conquistadors who would embark on their journeys were desperados, criminals, or otherwise people who did not have very many promising opportunities back in Europe. Many of them were illegitimate sons, barring them from social advancement. Combined with the fact that conquistadors had a 30% chance of dying while in the Americas, the New World acted as a shining beacon for those who had nothing left to lose. Much of the pillaging, looting, and destruction that came with the Iberian conquest came about from the massive cost to outfit the conquistadors with weapons, armor, horses, supplies, ships, etc. As many of them were poor, they had no realistic way of paying them back unless it was through pillaging local indigenous communities for whatever wealth they had, like jewelry or trinkets. Furthermore, the whispers of great golden empires and cities hidden in the Americas beckon these lowlifes to, by any means necessary, find the source. If a conquistador found gold, this meant he had could attain power. If he had power, then he could become famous. With all three, he'd be unstoppable. Cortés landed in modern-day Mexico at Potosí in March 1519. Cortés landed with the intention of conquering the vast pharaoh of Moctezuma II, the Huaytlatonii, or Emperor of the Aztecs. It was vital to Cortés that Moctezuma must be brought to Spanish heel and recognize the superiority and dominion of the King of Spain. Along with this, Cortés brought with him deep religious fervor to evangelize and convert the people of Mexico to Catholicism. After defeating local Maya warriors in a skirmish, Cortés was bestowed with slave girls, among whom was La Malinche. Her proficiency in both the local Mayan dialect and the Nahuatl language of the Aztecs proved invaluable to the Spanish, allowing for communication with Aztec representatives encountered by the invaders. Remaining steadfast by Cortés' side throughout the campaign, La Malinche played a pivotal role in the Spanish conquest, ultimately bearing his son, Martin. Directed northward, Cortés made a second landfall near Zempoala, encountering Aztec tax collectors in the vicinity who were extracting tribute from the local populace. News swiftly reached Moctezuma, prompting discussions among his council of elders. Opting for a diplomatic approach, Moctezuma dispatched gifts, including ceremonial regalia and precious artifacts, to the Spanish invaders. These offerings, gratefully received, only served to heighten Spanish interest in the region's riches. Cortés then established a garrison at Veracruz in April. By now, the Spanish were too committed to the conquest. To make sure none of his men entertained thoughts of going home, Cortés ordered that his 11 ships be destroyed. With resolute determination, Cortés embarked on a direct march towards Tenochtitlan in August. Cortés would either conquer or die trying. During his march to Tenochtitlan, Hernán Cortés came across Tlaxcala, a confederacy of approximately 200 towns and various tribes, devoid of central governance. Cortés engaged in a series of decisive battles in early September 1519 against the Tlaxcalans, and through shrewd diplomacy brought the Tlaxcalans into an alliance against the Aztecs. Cortés cemented this alliance with baptisms and gifts. Cortés was then advised by Moctezuma's ambassadors to take the Aztec-controlled road to Cholula, a significant religious city in Mesoamerica. After a cold welcome by the people of Cholula, an informant telling him that the Spanish were to be ambushed, Cortés ordered a preemptive strike. The ensuing massacre of Cholula convinced Moctezuma that the gifts he had been sending the Spanish were of no use. He must let the Spanish into Tenochtitlan or risk the same fate. On November 8, 1519, Hernán Cortés and his men entered Tenochtitlan. One of Cortés's men, Bernal Diaz de Castillo, wrote that, "When we saw all those cities and villages built on water, and the other great towns on dry land, and that straight and level causeway leading to Mexico, we were astounded. These great towns and shrines and buildings rising from the water, all made of stone, seemed like an enchanted vision of the tale of Amadis. Indeed, some of our soldiers asked whether or not it was all a dream. It was all so wonderful that I do not know how to describe this first glimpse of things never heard or never seen and never dreamed of before." Cortés himself wrote that the city is as large as Seville or Cordova. Its streets are very wide and straight. Some of these, and all the inferior ones, are half land and half water, and are navigated by canoes. There is one square twice as large as that of the city of Salamanca, surrounded by porticos, where are daily assembled more than 60,000 souls, engaged in the buying and selling. Moctezuma greeted Cortés with a ceremonious reception on the Great Causeway, accompanied by his retinue of dignitaries dressed in lavish gold and jewel-adorned attire. Moctezuma, acknowledging Cortés's purported authority, bestowed upon him more lavish gifts. Cortés, in turn, was granted lodging in the Excaycado Palace. However, from the get-go, tensions began to simmer as Cortés sought to insert his religious influence, prompting resistance from Moctezuma and his priests, who vehemently opposed the introduction of Christian symbols, namely, putting a cross and an image of the Virgin Mary on top of the Templo Mayor, Tenochtitlan's primary and grandest temple pyramid. The fragile equilibrium shattered when the Aztecs, incited by the Spanish provocations, unleashed a deadly assault on 7 Spanish soldiers at Veracruz, escalating hostilities. When news of the killings broke out, Moctezuma found himself ensnared, held captive by Cortés as a strategic pawn. Despite his confinement, Moctezuma maintained a semblance of authority under Cortés's watchful eye, playing the part of a cooperative ruler, albeit under duress. As Cortés consolidated his control, Moctezuma's loyalty wavered, torn between honoring tradition and appeasing his Spanish captors and the harsh realities of the Spanish conquest. Cortés, meanwhile, dispatched expeditions to exploit gold-rich provinces and imposing tributes on Moctezuma to finance his ambitions. Amid mounting discontent, whispers of rebellion echoed through Tenochtitlan as the Aztec gods allegedly decreed the expulsion of the Spanish invaders. Since the imminent danger, Moctezuma implored Cortés to depart, warning of impending doom. Despite his efforts to maintain order, Moctezuma's authority crumbled. The Aztec nobility began to rally behind Cuitlahuac, Moctezuma's brother and heir apparent. In April 1520, the Spanish expedition faced a formidable challenge as news reached Cortés of the arrival of a formidable force under Pamphilo de Narvaez, dispatched by Gunner Velázquez to crush Cortés's insubordination. Cortés committed an act of treason when he defied Velázquez's order to return home when Cortés first set out. Determined to thwart Narvaez's intentions, Cortés marshaled his troops and left behind his least dependable soldiers under Pedro de Alvarado's watchful eye to guard Moctezuma. Cortés launched a nocturnal assault on Narvaez's forces encamped at Zempoala, seizing the initiative and kept Narvaez himself, thus rallying many of Narvaez's troops to his own cause by offering promises of wealth and power. Traversing treacherous terrain, Cortés and his amalgamated forces returned to Tenochtitlan once more in June 1520. The Spanish re-entry into Tenochtitlan revealed a harrowing reality. Alvarado's rash actions had provoked a violent backlash from the Aztec populace, resulting in the massacre of numerous Aztec nobles during a religious observance at the Templo Mayor. Alvarado defended his preemptive strike to Cortés, citing word of an impending Aztec assault on the Spanish enclave. However, the ensuing chaos and uprising plunged the Spanish into a dire predicament, besieged within the confines of their palace stronghold by vengeful Aztec forces. Cortés ordered Moctezuma to address and calm the crowd from a balcony, but the ensuing hail of stones thrown at him mortally wounded Moctezuma. Aztec sources state that the Spaniards killed him by strangling, and not the stones. Regardless, the Spanish found themselves forced into a desperate retreat from Tenochtitlan. The retreat swiftly developed into a chaotic rout, as the Spanish struggled to navigate the narrow causeways leading out of Tenochtitlan while fending off ferocious Aztec attacks. Many Spaniards drowned trying to cross the causeway, and many more were injured in the fighting. Cortés, overcome with grief and remorse, their losses upon reaching the sanctuary of Tlacopan, immortalizing the nightmarish ordeal as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Harried by Aztec pursuers, the Aztecs endured further losses while seeking refuge in Tlaxcala. The resolute defense at the Battle of Otumba, where Spanish infantry and cavalry repelled overwhelming Aztec forces, saved the Spanish from annihilation. The toll of the retreat was staggering, with hundreds of casualties suffered by both the Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies. The Spanish were able to successfully seek refuge in Tlaxcala, where they were welcomed with open arms despite their dire condition. Cortés marshaled his resources after being reinforced by ships from Cuba. His men constructed 13 brigantines equipped with cannons, securing dominance over Lake Texcoco and surrounding Tenochtitlan. The Tlaxcalans put their full weight and confidence in the Spanish, contributing perhaps as much as 200,000 warriors for the ensuing siege. The siege of Tenochtitlan unfolded as a protracted 8-month affair. Despite valiant Aztec resistance, only Tenochtitlan and Tlatelolco held out against the encroaching Spanish tide. Cortés encircled Tenochtitlan by severing the causeways leading in and out of the city. The Spanish strangled the city's lifelines and infrastructure. On August 13, 1521, after enduring the punishing siege, Tenochtitlan capitulated. Cuauhtémoc, the last Aztec emperor, was apprehended and his city was ravaged. After the Aztecs ritually sacrificed 70 Spanish prisoners of war just before the city fell, Cortés forcefully imposed Christianity. He ordered the dismantling of the temples of Aztec gods and proclaimed an end to the grisly rituals. The city lay in ruins, its once grandeur reduced to ashes and rubble. The surviving Aztec populace, exiled from their ancestral home, faced a bleak future in the shadow of Mexico City's rising. The days of the Triple Alliance were over. The dawn of New Spain began. Much of the devastation caused to the people of Tenochtitlan during the siege can be attributed to the outbreak of a new foreign disease, smallpox. Before 1492, the countless indigenous groups in the Americas were untouched by the infectious diseases endemic to Eurasia and Africa, such as measles, smallpox, and influenza. These diseases were foreign to the Americas. A major factor as to why indigenous peoples lacked immunity is because they lacked the domesticated animals and livestock that often served as vectors for diseases like smallpox and measles, unlike the Europeans. Following the arrival of Europeans in the 15th century, these diseases swept through the indigenous populations as devastating epidemics, exacerbated by physical and psychological stress, including mass violence, such as Spain's conquest of Mexico, and enslavement. The Caribbean islands were particularly hard hit, with populations declining by over 99% by the year 1600. Across the Americas, populations plummeted by 50 to 95% by 1650. The decimation of indigenous populations led to ecological and economic upheaval, with ecosystems altering and labor shortages emerging. The loss of life indirectly fueled the establishment of the transatlantic slave trade as colonial powers sought cheap labor, further compounding the suffering of indigenous peoples with new diseases like malaria and yellow fever. It is a possibility that the Europeans did suffer some blowback, however. Starting in the late 1490s, Europeans began taking note of a new disease that they initially dubbed the French disease, that today we now call syphilis. There is a possibility that syphilis was brought from the Americas to Eurasia, but the true origins and transmission of syphilis remains the subject of debate and speculation. Part 5. The Conquest of Peru. Francisco Pizarro emerged into the world in 1478 amidst the rugged terrain of Trujillo, Extremadura. Born a bastard to a Spanish colonel and the daughter of a local farmer, Francisco's roots were modest. Deprived of formal education or societal acceptance, his path seemed limited. Yet, the new world beckoned, promising immense glory and wealth. Thus, like many of his time, Francisco followed the pull of adventure and opportunity across the Atlantic. In 1502, Francisco embarked on a journey to Hispaniola under the guidance of Nicolas de Ovando. Transitioning to the mainland in 1509, he ventured alongside Alonso de Ojeda, and then Vasco Núñez de Balboa. Settling in Panama, he carved a niche for himself, ascending to positions of authority as a magistrate and Encomienda inspector. Despite lacking literacy, his shrewdness and determination marked him as a figure of significance in the burgeoning Spanish colonies. Pizarro ventured southward between 1524 and 1526, driven by the whispers of a fabled empire overflowing with gold to the south of Panama. After finding tangible evidence of this empire in the form of gold-bearing trade ships and the port city of Tumbes, hoping to emulate the success of Hernán Cortés, Pizarro gained permission from the King of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor Charles V to conquer this land. Pizarro and his second in command, Diego de Almagro, embarked on a pivotal expedition in 1530. With over 200 men on his side, he conquered Tumbes in 1532 and began marching into the Andes. Finally, on November 15, 1532, first contact was made with the Inca, and Pizarro sent word that he wished to speak with their king at Cajamarca in the highlands of Peru. Before the arrival of the Spanish in Peru, the Inca Empire was stricken with significant internal discord and external pressures. The sprawling dominion was a patchwork of subdued territories bound by Inca military supremacy, hostage-taking, forced resettlements, and burdensome levies. In addition, the Inca enforced their religion and culture over their conquered subjects. Despite some advantages of Inca governance, such as infrastructure improvements and better food security, loyalty to the central authority waned in the face of persistent rebellions and internal strife. More notably, a protracted 6-year civil war erupted upon the demise of Inca ruler Huayna Capac due to smallpox. The subsequent struggle for the throne between his sons Atahualpa and Huáscar further weakened the empire's cohesion. The ascension of Atahualpa to power following the devastating civil conflict did not herald stability for the Inca Empire. Despite his lavish lifestyle as the Sapa Inca, internal divisions persisted. Diplomatic relations deteriorated into open warfare between factions based in the city of Quito and the traditional Inca heartland of Cusco. Though decisive, Atahualpa's victory over Huáscar failed to heal the fractures within the empire, as evidenced by his purge of rivals and destruction of historical records. His reign, characterized by opulence and authoritarianism, disguised the underlying tensions that would ultimately render the empire vulnerable to external threats. The Inca Empire's vulnerability was further exacerbated by the onslaught of European diseases, decimating its population and destabilizing its power structures. The devastation wrought by smallpox, compounded by internal strife and the consolidation of power under Atahualpa's rule, created a precarious environment ripe for exploitation by foreign invaders. Thus, when Francisco Pizzaro and his men arrived in Inca territory in 1532, they found an empire weakened by internal conflict and ravaged by disease, which only helped to facilitate their impending conquest. Shortly after his triumph and the defeat of Huáscar, Atahualpa was observed relaxing within the confines of the Inca baths near Cajamarca. It was during this moment that Pizzaro and his men arrived at the town. Pizzaro dispatched Hernando de Soto to the encampment of Atahualpa. Accompanied by a youthful interpreter, de Soto announced that he was entrusted with teaching them the truth about God's word to the Inca ruler. He then extended an invitation to Atahualpa to convene with Pizzaro at the latter's quarters in Cajamarca. In an act of reciprocal hospitality, Atahualpa extended refreshments as a gesture of goodwill. However, it was not until the arrival of Hernando Pizzaro, a brother of Francisco Pizzaro, that Atahualpa expressed his concerns regarding the Spanish presence and reports of their hostile activities along the coast. In the face of Hernando Pizzaro's denial of these allegations, Atahualpa reluctantly let him go and agreed to reconvene the following day. The dawn of the ensuing day, the 16th of November 1532, witnessed Pizzaro position his forces around the Cajamarca Plaza. As Atahualpa arrived, accompanied by thousands of unarmed adherents, the Dominican friar Vicente de Valverde and his interpreter Felipe Ilu initiated an exchange. Valverde explained the tenets of the Christian faith to Atahualpa and asserted the sovereignty of King Charles. He presented a Bible to Atahualpa, who then refused it and declared that "I will be no man's tributary." The meeting erupted into a hail of thunderous cannon fire as the Battle of Cajamarca began. Implying a combination of firearms and cavalry charges, the ambushing Spanish forces inflicted considerable devastation upon the unprepared Inca ranks, resulting in a one-sided encounter characterized by 2,000 Inca casualties and only one Spanish injury. In the chaos, Atahualpa was captured. In February 1533, Amerigo reinforced Pizzaro's expedition in Cajamarca with an additional 150 soldiers and 50 horses. Together, they amassed a formidable force aimed at conquering the Inca Empire. During his imprisonment, the Spanish asserted dominance over Atahualpa, compelling him to issue commands to his generals to back down under the threat of death. Exploiting his influence, they coerced him into promising vast quantities of gold and silver in exchange for his release. Despite objections from some, like Pizzaro and De Soto, the majority of the Spanish troops clamored for his execution, fueled by false interpretations from Pizzaro interpreter Felipe Lo. Paranoia grappled the Spanish, fueled by whispers of hidden attacks and secret armies. Atahualpa was coerced into baptism to evade the stake, adopting the name Francisco for the ritual. Ultimately, on August 29, 1533, Atahualpa met his demise through garroting. Following Atahualpa's execution, Pizzaro pressed forward with his conquest, leading his army toward Cusco. The arrival of Pedro de Alvarado bolstered the Spanish forces, though Alvarado's motives were driven primarily by greed for gold. With combined strength, the Spanish solidified their hold over the region. After the demise of Atahualpa, Pizzaro installed Tupac Atahualpa, Atahualpa's brother, as a subservient Inca ruler. Tupac's sudden demise soon after left Manco Inca Yupanqui to ascend to the Inca throne. Initially, Manco Inca aligned with the Spanish, gaining popularity in the south of the empire. However, unrest brewed in the north near Quito, where Atahualpa's loyalists gathered strength. The Spanish soon defeated the rebels. Initially, Manco Inca fostered amicable relations with Francisco Pizzaro and his men. Yet, his time in Cusco and horrible mistreatment under the custody of Pizzaro's two other brothers, Juan and Gonzalo, prompted rebellion. Seizing an opportunity under the guise of reclaiming a golden statue from the UK Valley, Manco fled from Cusco, aiming to exploit the growing discord between Amerigo and Pizzaro. Commencing in April 1536, Manco besieged Cusco, stalling the Spanish for a year, and obliterating 4 relief expeditions from Lima. Despite initial successes, faltering morale and superior Spanish weaponry dashed Manco's hopes of recapturing Cusco. Upon the Spanish reconquest of Cusco, Manco retreated to Ollantaytambo, staging resilient offensives against the Spanish. As defeat loomed, Manco withdrew to the mountainous Vilcabamba, establishing the Neo-Inca state, which endured for decades under his progeny, culminating with Tupac Amaru's demise in 1527. After the Inca were reduced to little more than a minor power, Pizzaro began dividing up the new colony of New Castile between himself and his brothers. Discontent at this nepotism, a power struggle between Pizzaro and Almagro ensued, ultimately resulting in Almagro's execution after the Battle of Las Salinas. His adherents sought vengeance, stabbing Pizzaro to death in his own home in June 1541. Despite internal turmoil, Spanish colonization persisted, solidified by the founding of Lima in 1535 and the creation of the Viceroyalty of Peru in 1542. The Spanish were here to stay. Part 6. Conquering the Rest. By the time of the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs, the Yucatán Peninsula was a land divided, ruled by various Maya dynasties competing for power and influence under the shadow of the once united Confederacy. Despite the fragmentation following the fall of Mayapan in 1441, several prominent families, including the Colcombs, Zeus, and Shells, vied for control over the peninsula. This period of disunity persisted until the arrival of the Spaniards, led by one of Cortés's men, Francisco de Montejo, in 1527. Montejo's initial expedition marked the beginning of a relentless campaign to conquer the Yucatán. After initially encountering fierce resistance, Montejo's forces prevailed at a clash at Aque, prompting surrender from local chieftains. Montejo launched a second campaign in 1531, consolidating Spanish control over strategic strongholds such as Campeche and Chichen Itza. Despite facing opposition from the Cupules, Sotuta, and Corchoa, Montejo's efforts gradually gained momentum, with alliances with Mayan allies such as the Zhou rulers of Mani. The final phase of the conquest, spearheaded by Montejo's son, took place between 1540 and 1546, and saw the establishment of Merida as a Spanish stronghold in the north of the peninsula. Through a combination of military prowess and diplomatic negotiations, the Spanish gradually subdued more Mayan dynasties. By 1546, the last major bastions of indigenous resistance were quelled, cementing Spanish hegemony over the Yucatán Peninsula. The last independent Mayan stronghold at Tayasal fell in 1697. As Spain was expanding to the south of Mexico, it was also pushing into its north. In 1530, Juan de Oñate, a lieutenant of the Conquistador Nuno de Guzman, began building a small town near the site of present-day Tenochtitlan. Oñate called the small village Guadalajara in honor of the Spanish city where Guzman had been born. However, from the beginning, the small settlement had come under attack by the indigenous Zacatecas, and the Spanish garrisons were routinely massacred. The village would eventually be relocated to its modern-day site in 1542. Starting from Mexico City, Nuno de Guzman led a force of Spaniards and indigenous soldiers in 1530 to conduct a terror campaign throughout the region. Guzman often used unprovoked killing, torture, and enslavement, his army leaving a trail of corpses and destroyed houses and crops. Even by Spanish standards, Guzman was unusually cruel and was tried for his crimes and died a poor, insignificant man in 1558. Outraged by Guzman's campaign, the Caxcans of modern-day southern Zacatecas and northern Jalisco sparked a fierce rebellion in 1540, the Mixtón War. Pedro de Alvarado was sent to suppress the rebellion, but was met with resistance, resulting in significant casualties on both sides. On June 24, 1541, Alvarado led an attack near Tenochtitlan, but was quickly overwhelmed. In the hasty retreat, Alvarado fell from his horse and died a few days later. Antonio de Mendoza, the first viceroy of New Spain, managed to quell the rebellion by December, effectively crushing native resistance in the region. The discovery of silver in the present-day city of Zacatecas in 1546 dramatically altered the dynamics of the conflict, attracting a flood of Spanish settlers and indigenous laborers to the area to mine the abundant silver found there. This influx of people intensified the conflict as the indigenous Zacatecas and Guachichiles resisted Spanish exploitation of their lands and resources. Angry at Spanish intrusion onto the lands, the indigenous began staging ambushes and raids on the vulnerable convoys, transporting silver and goods to and from the city. In turn, Spanish soldiers began raiding indigenous villages to enslave them. The ensuing Chichimeca War, lasting from 1550 to 1590, became one of New Spain's most expensive wars to fight, in both blood and coin. Efforts to pacify the region were undertaken by successive viceroys, including Luis de Velasco and Alfonso Manrique de Zuniga, who implemented policies aimed at securing peace through diplomacy and aid. These efforts included negotiations with indigenous leaders, the prohibition of enslavement of captured natives, and the distribution of food, clothing, and agricultural tools to incentivize peaceful settlement. Ultimately, the war ended in 1590 with the signing of a peace agreement. The aftermath of the Chichimeca Wars saw significant changes in the social and cultural landscape of Zacatecas, as indigenous tribes were assimilated into Spanish society or relocated to designated settlements. The once nomadic lifestyle of the Zacatecas and Guachichile gave way to a more settled existence. In 1536, Spanish conquistadors embarked on an imperialist journey up the Magdala River in Colombia, fueled by ambitions of plundering wealthy civilizations like another Inca, or, more specific to the Muisca, uncovering the mythical El Dorado, a city or man made out of gold. The coronation ceremony for the Muisca's leader, the Zipa, involved the Zipa being showered in gold dust before taking off on a raft sailed on Lake Guadavita. When the raft got to the center of Lake Guadavita, the Zipa would dive into the lake and then return to the shore, now recognized as the new chief. The Spanish expedition down the Magdala River encountered treacherous swamps, jungles, and flooded plains. Nature itself seemed to conspire against them, with rain, mud, and mosquitoes relentlessly harassing the invaders. Despite these adversities, Gonzalo Jimenez, the Inca expedition's leader, persisted. He and his men were driven by the pursuit of salt, a commodity vital for their survival. Following the trail of the essential mineral, the expedition ventured into the Andean highlands, encountering the Muisca's people in 1537. The Muisca, a Bronze Age society renowned for their peaceful coexistence, found themselves thrust into a clash of civilizations as the Spanish conquistadors sought to exploit their wealth and resources. The conquest of Colombia by the Spanish conquistadors left a devastating legacy of violence and exploitation. The Spanish invaders unleashed a wave of destruction upon the Muisca civilization, leaving a trail of death in their wake, trying to extract what little paper thin gold the Muisca actually had. In 1538, Jimenez founded the city of Santa Fe de Bogota, becoming the capital and center of his kingdom of New Granada. Jimenez himself faded into obscurity, dying poor and of leprosy in 1579. Since the first contact in 1500, the Portuguese held an insignificant presence in the Americas. Despite initial sporadic efforts, Portuguese activity remained modest, with the focus primarily directed towards Asia and Africa due to their established success in those regions. This limited attention to the New World stemmed from Portugal's resource constraints and the perceived lack of immediate lucrative prospects in Brazil compared to other territories. However, as French incursions along Brazil's coast raised concerns about Portugal's claims to the land, the Portuguese dispatched Martim Alfonso de Sousa in 1530 to assert Portugal's territorial claims and establish settlements. De Sousa's initiatives, including the founding of São Vicente and Santo André in the modern-day province of São Paulo, laid the groundwork for a permanent Portuguese presence and economic endeavors, notably the introduction of sugar cultivation from the Cape Verde Islands. In place of silver, sugar became the economic nucleus for Brazil. Grown primarily along the fertile red soils of Brazil's northeastern coast, sugar plantations thrived. These plantations were presided over by affluent mill lords, who oversaw the cultivation and processing of sugarcane with extensive slave labor. Plantations were called engenhos, or engines. Each engenho, resembling a self-contained town, boasted its essential facilities like chapels, stables, and slave quarters. These expansive estates stunted urban growth, resulting in a colony characterized by sparse urbanization. Despite initial challenges in establishing the colony, such as indigenous resistance and tropical diseases, Portuguese endeavors continued. The subsequent adoption of a feudal land ownership system, reflected in the division of the land into captaincies, and their allocation to noblemen, proved largely unsuccessful in fostering sustainable development. Ultimately, the failure of many of the captaincies due to disease prompted the Portuguese crown to centralize control under a governor-general in 1534, mirroring the Spanish viceroy model, with Salvador designated as the Brazilian capital. Part 7. Encomienda and Economy. When Columbus landed in America, the indigenous were quickly enslaved by the Europeans. The Catholic monarchs soon heard about Columbus using slavery and faced a moral dilemma. They had to balance their desire for wealth with their Christian ideals. Unlike earlier wars against Muslims, where religious differences justified slavery, the indigenous people of the Americas had not wronged Spain or God, as they did not know about Christianity. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI tried to ease these worries by giving Spain control over the indigenous, with the condition that they be converted to Christianity. However, the Spaniards in the New World were more interested in using native labor than in spreading Christianity. This created a disconnect between what the Pope wanted and what was actually happening. In 1503, the Spanish crown set up the Encomienda System to solve this moral issue. Under the system, Spaniards, called encomienderos, were given grants over native communities. They promised to protect and teach the indigenous about Christianity in exchange for their labor. In theory, it was a give-and-take relationship akin to medieval feudalism, but in reality, it was often just brutal exploitation. The natives, though legally free, were forced into back-breaking hard labor and were mistreated by encomienderos who cared more about profit. In essence, slavery was allowed in the Americas as long as it was called by another name. Combined with the hard labor and the many new diseases, indigenous populations dropped sharply. For example, Mexico had about 22 million people in 1500, but only 3 million by 1550. The cruelty and profit of the Encomienda system are shown in the large silver deposits in Potosí and Zacatecas. At first, gold excited the Europeans, but it was silver that shaped the economy. The opening of major silver mines in Potosí and Zacatecas during the 1540s was a key moment in the history of the Spanish economy. These deep mines, stretching miles underground, changed Mexican and Peruvian society and became the center of Spanish economic activity in the Americas. Potosí, in particular, became very important. It was the largest city in the Americas during the 1600s. At high altitude in the Andes, which was not fit for farming, the city relied on mules to bring in goods, creating economic ties between the mining areas and Europe. The wealth from these silver mines spread out, linking the colonies with Europe through trade routes. Lima became the capital of Peru because it was close to a good seaport, making it easier to transport silver from the Andean plateau. In colonial Mexico, the northern mining areas became centers of economic activity, connecting the mines with Mexico City and the port of Veracruz. Huancavelica, in modern-day Peru, had lots of mercury, which was important for silver production by changing purification methods. European miners in Mexico found a way to use mercury to extract silver from ore, a method already known in China. This new method freed the mines from relying on local technology and let Spaniards fully exploit native labor to improve mining efficiency. Despite the abundance of wealth from silver mining, the human cost was staggering. Huancavelica's mercury mines were deadly, with workers suffering mercury poisoning and terrible living conditions. Similarly, Potosí's mines forced indigenous laborers to work hard, causing much suffering and disability. If 20 healthy Indians enter on Monday, half come out on Saturday as cripples, one angry priest wrote to Spain. In the early 1400s, Europe faced a period of tough economic times known as the Great Bullion Famine. During this time, there was a shortage of money because the mines that produced silver and gold were running out. This meant that fewer new coins were minted, and the ones in circulation became lower in quality and value. Banks were also reluctant to lend money. To make matters worse, Europe was using a lot of its precious metals to buy expensive goods like silk, spices, and pearls from the East. The discovery of the huge amounts of wealth in the Americas ended the shortage of precious metals and, at first, proved to be a powerful boon to the Spanish Empire. The Spanish government taxed 20% of all wealth from the Americas, a tax called the Royal Fifth. However, this influx of wealth quickly led to rapid inflation in Spain, making prices skyrocket in the Price Revolution. The hyperinflation made money worth less. The cost of managing the American territories and defending them were very high. The Spanish Habsburgs spent a lot of money on prolonged wars and other costly palace-building projects, instead of investing in industries and land that could help the economy and people. They took out countless loans in the process, thinking they could pay it back with American silver. But as the silver yields from their mines turned up shorter and shorter every year, Spain failed to pay the loans back. Thus, Spain plunged deeper into debt. Spain went bankrupt 4 times under King Philip II alone. To make matters worse, Basque gangs in Potosí, who virtually controlled the city, stole silver from the mines, and transporters were robbed by pirates and others on the way to ports. During one visit by a tax inspector, he found that the rival Basque gangs had collectively defrauded the Spanish crown of 4.5 million pesos out of its rightful dues. To put that in perspective, that was more than the total output of the mines in 1 year. To add to this, much of the silver that illegitimately ended up in Spanish hands went straight to China. The Ming dynasty phased out paper money due to inflation and started using silver coins instead, of which it needed a lot of. Spanish merchants used this demand to trade for things like porcelain, silk, and spices. Spain tried to fix its money problems by raising taxes, but this only served to hurt regular people and kept them poor. Spain faced population shortages as the American colonies saw hundreds of thousands of people emigrate. The return of the plague in the 1590s did not help either. This hurt Spain's economy even more because it meant fewer people could work and produce things, especially because the imperial government did not focus on building an economy, therefore perpetuating a cycle of economic decline. The word got out fast in Spain about how badly the Encomienda System was treating people. The 1512 Laws of Burgos set out to dictate how the indigenous should be treated and what the Spanish Starless duties as Christians were. Then, the Council of the Indies in Spain, which looked after everything in the colonies, gave orders that the local and native people shouldn't be exploited to the point where they starved or died. However, because the colonies were difficult to govern because they were far away, a culture of treating indigenous people badly persisted anyways. Conquistadors used the Encomienda System to get rich for themselves, ignoring Christian morals. The Spanish crown couldn't decide on what to do. On one hand, it wanted to spread Christianity and civilize the indigenous. On the other hand, they needed workers in the Americas to keep the colonies going. People like the Dominican friar Bartolomé de las Casas started speaking out about how bad the system was. He wrote a very brief recital of the destruction of the Indies, which exposed the harsh realities. Charles V saw the problem and tried to fix it with the 1542 New Laws. These laws declared that native workers had to be paid for their work. Government officials or clergy who got encomienda grants had to give them back to the king. And from then on, encomienda grants wouldn't be passed down to family when someone died. They would just end. In Peru, the encomenderos didn't like these new laws. Gonzalo Pizzaro led a revolt in 1546 and overthrew the viceroyalty. The new laws were quickly loosened soon after. In 1573, Philip II made a big decision. He decided that no more encomienda grants could be given out in new areas. This reflected a shift in Spain's colonial behavior, from conquering to pacification. Encomiendas changed to a new system called Repartimiento, where workers were paid a small wage. It was a small improvement, but the abuses continued. The colonies also started using enslaved Africans a lot to do farming and mining jobs. Even though this was a change from Encomienda, these systems still hurt the indigenous of the Americas. Part 8. The Quest for Souls. As I've mentioned a lot in this video, Spain and Portugal were very motivated to explore the New World because they believed it was their duty to spread the Catholic faith. Spain had just finished an 800-year-long battle against Muslims when Columbus arrived in the Americas. The people who conquered those lands were determined to spread their religion and punish anyone who didn't agree with it. The religion passion in Spain was so strong that it led to the
Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
The Spanish Inquisition aimed to remove any trace of non-Catholic beliefs in Spain. Many Jews and Muslims were forced to convert to Christianity or leave, as happened with the Alhambra Decree. Some people suspected that those who converted were secretly still practicing their old beliefs. This suspicion led Pope Sixtus IV to allow the Catholic monarchs to start the Spanish Inquisition in 1478. Portugal then set up its own version called the Holy Office, following Spain's model. The Spanish Inquisition was led by the Grand Inquisitor, notably Tomás de Torquemada, who had a lot of power with the help of both the government and church leaders. Torquemada's time in charge was known for being very harsh and extreme. He used torture and took people's belongings to make them confess their heresy. The infamous auto de fe ceremonies were public events that showed the Inquisition's authority and power. The Inquisition eventually spread to the Americas. It focused on converting the many heretics there and making sure everyone followed Catholic teachings. This became even more important as the Protestant Reformation began in 1517 and divided the Catholic Church. With the Church's reputation at stake, Rome wanted to gain as many new followers as possible from the Americas to strengthen its position. In 1569, separate Inquisition courts were set up in Mexico City and Lima. These courts had authority over large areas and dealt with offenses like Protestantism, blasphemy, and immoral behavior. As society in the colonies became more diverse, the Inquisition also started targeting indigenous beliefs and local customs. By the late 1600s, the Inquisition became less active due to political issues and ideological disagreements. Eventually, the Spanish Inquisition was put to a complete end in 1834. As Spain started to expand its colonies in the early 1500s, the crown realized it needed a reason to take land already owned by others. The Spanish requirement, or Requirimiento, written in 1513, it was used to justify Spain's conquest in the Americas. It was a 1,000-word document meant to be read aloud to native peoples. It said Spain owned land because of the Treaty of Tordesillas. It also stressed the importance of Christianity and the Pope's authority, and demanded that the natives submit to Spanish rule. If the natives refused, then Spain would make war against you in all ways and manners, and shall do all the harm and damage that we can, and all the deaths and losses that result will be your fault, and not that of their highnesses, nor ours, nor of these gentlemen in our company. In reality, this document was kind of useless, as it was incomprehensible to its audience. Still, it gave the Spanish conquerors a sense of moral superiority, justifying the plunder and destruction they caused. To spread Catholicism across the Americas, the crown used evangelism, religious groups, and missionaries. After conquering lands, missionary work began. Groups like the Franciscans, Augustinians, and Dominicans led the efforts. They baptized many and tried to replace indigenous religions, but with mixed success. Some locals kept their beliefs hidden. Movements like Taqui Unqui in Peru challenged Christian dominance in the 1560s. Frontier areas had missions that aimed to create self-governing communities under Spanish rule. Missions like the Jesuit ones in Paraguay and Franciscan ones in California were crucial to this effort. The Jesuits built reducciones, where they relocated rural indigenous groups into towns for easier conversion and civilization. The Church also controlled society by preaching obedience and maintaining the status quo, helping in Spain's efforts of pacification after the initial conquest. Part 9. In Search of Higher Civilization. After the Spanish settled in Mexico and Peru, many conquistadors began exploring the mainland. They hoped to find another rich empire like the Aztecs or Incas. They wanted to conquer and rule these civilizations without having to build a new civilization. While most hoped for riches, some ended up living with the native people. One such man was Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. Cabeza de Vaca came to the Americas like any other conquistador. He came from a military family. He joined an expedition to La Florida led by Pamphilio Narvaez in 1527, seeking honor and glory. La Florida back then referred to the large and unknown area that was the American Southeast. Narvaez landed in Florida and sent away ships, cutting off their supplies. That summer, they struggled through the difficult swamps and forests with their fewer supplies. Near present-day Tallahassee, the local Appalachian people attacked them. Narvaez and his 240 men built crude boats to escape. They faced hunger and thirst at sea, sailing west along the coast. They reached the Mississippi River, where strong currents separated his men. Narvaez abandoned De Vaca and others, leaving them adrift. De Vaca and 80 men washed ashore on Galveston Island. The native people there welcomed them with food and care, much to the surprise of the Spaniards, who imagined them to be barbaric savages. That winter, famine and illness gripped the island. De Vaca was forced to be a healer, using both Catholic and native rituals to cure the sick. For 4 years he traded goods between the native groups on the Texan mainland and Galveston Island. Despite adjusting to their new life, he still wanted to return to Mexico. De Vaca and 3 companions were later enslaved by another native group while trading on the mainland. They worked hard and ate little for over a year. They eventually managed to escape and traveled west. They met more native people who sought them out. These people were drawn by tales of bearded men with miraculous healing powers and saw relief from their afflictions. De Vaca once again assumed the role of lead physician, performing surgeries and restoring health. As they moved through new lands, they lived a nomadic life. They wandered west, often injured, naked, and tired. De Vaca consoled himself with thoughts of Christ's much greater suffering. Along the way, they were accompanied by indigenous travelers. Their entourage swelled with thousands of followers, drawn by tales of the four men's extraordinary abilities and offerings of blessings. As the 4 men walked, indigenous escorts announced their impending arrival to local villages, and opportunists sacked them. Eventually, they reached the Gulf of California and met 4 Spaniards on horseback. The riders were quite perturbed to see me so strangely dressed and in the company of Indians, he wrote. They looked at me for a long time, so astonished that they were not able to speak or ask me questions. After 8 long years and many sun-soaked miles, De Vaca and his men returned to Christian life in 1536. He struggled to adapt, even finding it hard to wear clothes and sleep on a bed. Sailing home to Spain, he took up his pen in defense of the natives he initially set out to conquer. All these people, in order to be attracted to becoming Christians and subjects of your imperial majesty, need to be treated well. This is a very sure way to accomplish this. Indeed, There's no other way. Narvaez's failed expedition was not the last time Spain tried to conquer Florida. Like Cortés and Pizzaro, Hernando de Soto came from Extremadura, Spain. De Soto first came to the Americas at 14 years old with only sword and buckler. He quickly made a name for himself as a ruthless conquistador, known for his exploits in Panama and Peru. He became very wealthy and one of Spain's most esteemed citizens. In 1537, still hungry for adventure and riches, De Soto got permission from the king to conquer and colonize La Florida. Ignoring the past failures of De León and Narvaez, he invested his entire fortune and even went into debt to assemble a force of 600 men, 220 horses, 12 pigs, and a pack of fierce war dogs. In May 1539, his fleet landed on the west coast of present-day Florida. Soon after landing, De Soto's men found Juan Ortiz, a Spanish captive spared by the natives. Ortiz learned the local languages and understood their customs. This was crucial for De Soto to communicate and negotiate. With Ortiz's help and his own experience from Central and South America, De Soto marched north. He plundered and enslaved native settlements along the way, punishing any who resisted. De Soto's men faced a hard march toward the Appalachia. The Spanish managed to ambush them in battle and wintered in the capital in Haixa for 5 months. The Spanish took their resources and left destruction behind. The dense population of the southeast offered both opportunities and challenges. De Soto sought out powerful native city-states, hoping to find treasures like those in Mexico and Peru. His aggressive approach led to many deaths and spread European diseases among the natives. Some of De Soto's pigs escaped or retreated, leading to the proliferation of wild hogs that still cause problems in the U.S. today. While in Haixa, De Soto heard about a land ruled by a woman rich in gold. This story came from a young boy from far away. De Soto planned to follow the Gulf Coast west, but changed his plan. He turned inland in March 1540, hoping to conquer this land. De Soto marched into modern-day Georgia, capturing villagers and demanding to see the greatest lord and richest province. Some chiefs helped him just to get rid of his army, while others wanted his help against their enemies. Despite their better weapons, his men struggled to find food, and ate dogs and pork boiled in water. As they entered South Carolina, they doubted the boy's story until they met the Lady of Coffeechacquee. She welcomed them with food and resources, but De Soto, still seeking greater riches, pressed on, taking her hostage to ensure safe passage. He entered the Appalachian Mountains, hoping to find another Potosí. De Soto marched into Tennessee but found no gold, so he returned to Georgia. Again, he demanded supplies and labor from natives along the way. This pattern continued as he moved southwest, exploiting the hospitality of local tribes like the Coosa in central Georgia, before taking their chief and resources. West of the Coosa in Alabama, De Soto encountered the powerful chief Tucalosa. Tucalosa provided a feast but delayed providing women and baggage carriers until they reached Mabilla, 5 days away. He traveled with De Soto, who was unaware of the trap awaiting them in Mabilla. In Mabilla, De Soto and 40 men hastily entered the town, triggering the ambush. They retreated and the Spaniards set fire to the town. We killed them all, some with fire, others with swords, others with the lances. The battle was brutal, and both sides suffered heavy losses. De Soto lost 20 men and many horses. The native warriors were annihilated. Leaving Mabilla with fewer men, De Soto faced harsh weather and shortages in Mississippi. At Chicasa, native warriors set a fire that destroyed vital supplies and killed some horses. Despite this, the Spanish adapted by making new equipment and fortifications. As they moved west, they continued to face fierce resistance from the natives. Battles became frequent and intense. Driven by the necessity of securing supplies and asserting their dominance, they persevered, even as the numbers shrunk and their supplies dwindled. Crossing the Mississippi River presented a formidable challenge, but a beatable one. De Soto's army continued west, chasing rumors of riches. They traveled from northeast Arkansas to Missouri's Boot Heel, into the Ozarks, hoping to find treasures. Entering the Great Plains, the land of nomadic buffalo hunters, they faced language barriers and dwindling resources. The harsh winter in east central Arkansas took many lives, leaving De Soto's force weak. In the end, De Soto's dream of riches and conquest failed. Faced with illness and native resistance, his vision dissolved into despair. By spring 1542, De Soto was sick and bedridden. He named Luis de Moscoso, who served with him in Peru, as his successor. A day later, De Soto died at aged 42. Bartolomé de las Casas wrote that De Soto was now in the depths of hell, enjoying the wages of his wickedness. Most of De Soto's men felt relieved at his death. Luis de Moscoso aimed to return the invaders to Christian land in Mexico. He led them into central Texas, hoping to march south, but finding no food, they returned to the Mississippi. Sailing down the river, they reached the Gulf and then Mexico, where the soldiers leaped ashore and kissed the ground. While De Soto was plundering the American southeast, another conquistador was doing the same in the southwest. Francisco Vasquez de Coronado began his journey north from New Spain in early 1540. 400 Spaniards, wearing gold steel armor and carrying swords, guns, and crossbows, left Mexico with 1,300 native warriors who were not as well dressed. They also brought 550 horses, many animals, black slaves, native servants, 4 friars, and 2 painters. They wanted to confirm and conquer Friar Marcos de Niza's report about Estevanico's findings of Cibola. Estevanico was a slave from North Africa and had traveled west with Cabeza de Vaca. After returning to Mexico, Estevanico was put under the ownership of the Viceroy of New Spain, Antonio de Mendoza. De Mendoza sent Marcos de Niza and Estevanico to explore the new land north of New Spain. Estevanico reported 7 large cities with buildings decorated with precious stones. These cities, called Cibola, were said to be rich and full of well-dressed people. Marcos claimed these people were gold and that they were camels and elephants. Coronado, a young leader of 28, was drawn by the promise of riches in Cibola. He married the daughter of a wealthy Mexican treasurer for financial support. Although he lacked military experience, his administrative skills and royal connections won him in the Viceroy's favor to lead the expedition. Coronado set out on a dangerous journey into the unknown with the largest Spanish army yet into the modern-day USA. Coronado's army struggled as he moved up the coast of the Gulf of California and into the Sonoran Desert. They were overburdened and inexperienced. Men quickly shed their gear, horses collapsed from exhaustion, and slaves ran away. Scouts reported that the land ahead was rough and barren, contrary to Friar Marcos' promise of a gentle and fertile land. Everything the friar had said was found to be the opposite, Coronado wrote to the Viceroy. Marcos' promise of food at an indigenous stronghold called Chichimeca were false, leading the expedition into deeper trouble. Marcos had misled the troops to believe that Cibola was near the coast, but they realized they were marching further inland. After weeks of travel, the Spanish finally reached Cibola. Instead of the grandeur described by Friar Marcos, they found a modest settlement on a cliff. This settlement was a pueblo inhabited by the Zuni people. Still, Coronado declared Spain's sovereignty over the land and its inhabitants. The subsequent skirmish with the Cibolans were driven more by hunger than ideology. Coronado's forces won, securing vital supplies. One soldier wrote, "We found what we needed more than gold and silver, corn and beans and fowls, better than those of New Spain, and salt, the best and whitest that I had ever seen in all my life." So as to not beat around the bush, Coronado wrote to Viceroy Mendoza, I can say truthfully that Friar Marcos had not spoken the truth in anything he said. There does not appear to me to be any prospect of obtaining gold and silver. Coronado spent the summer and fall of 1540 in Cibola, but sent scouts deeper into the new land. One group traveled far enough west that they encountered a great river gorge, with rocks bigger than that of the Great Tower of Seville. These were the first European accounts of the Grand Canyon. Another group under Hernando de Alarcon was sent by sea with supplies at the beginning of the expedition when Coronado believed that Cibola was on the coast. He encountered the Colorado River and peaceful indigenous people, making the first European sighting of California. In late summer 1540, a delegation from a distant pueblo offered peace. Among them was an indigenous man with a tattoo of cow-like creatures. Intrigued, 20 of Coronado's men traveled to the pueblo and returned with a slave named El Turco. El Turco spoke of a land far to the east called Quivira, said to be rich with treasures, capturing Coronado's interest. In late April 1541, Coronado and his men, guided by El Turco and other natives, journeyed into the Great Plains. I arrived at some plains so without landmarks that it was as if we were in the middle of the sea, Coronado wrote. The grasslands amazed the Spanish with their endless horizons and enormous herds of bison. They encountered the nomadic tribes who lived with the buffalo herds and communicated effectively with the Spanish through gestures and signs. As they ventured deeper, navigation became difficult as the stiff grass obscured their trails. Coronado encountered indigenous nomads in Texas who described Quivira differently from El Turco. Quivira had simple thatch houses and no gold, only corn. Feeling deceived, Coronado sent most of his army back and kept 30 horsemen to continue east with El Turco, now in chains. In central Kansas, Coronado reached Quivira. The nomadic accounts of Quivira were true. Instead of tall stone buildings, he found round thatch huts. The people wore buffalo hides and ate raw meat. The only metal in the village was a piece of copper worn by the chief. Though Quivira did sit on some fertile farming land. I had not seen better in all of Spain, nor Italy, nor part of France. But Coronado was in search of gold, not dirt. El Turco admitted to deceiving the Spanish, hoping they'd get lost in the endless plains and die. Without waiting for further talk or counter-arguments, a soldier put a cord around the Indian's neck from behind and tightened it with a stick. That strangled him, and then they buried him next to the tent. Coronado spent the expedition's last winter with his army along the Rio Grande River. His men grew restless. Some wanted to settle in Quivira, while others wanted to go home. During a horse race, Coronado was injured. Believing he was near death, he decided to return to his family. In spring 1542, the disheartened army began their journey back to Spanish territory. Many men left along the way, and fewer than 100 returned to Mexico City. Coronado's return was met with little grace. His reputation suffered, and he lost his governorship, estates, and wealth. He died in 1554 at around 44 years old. The third major Spanish foray into what is now the USA was led by Juan de Oñate. Like De Soto and Coronado, he also took what he wanted as he traveled. Oñate was born around 1550 in Zacatecas, Mexico. He came from a family of explorers and conquerors. He married Isabel de Tolosa Cortés Moctezuma, tying him to the families of Hernán Cortés and Moctezuma. In 1595, King Philip II gave Oñate a contract to conquer, colonize, and settle New Mexico. It was after the Franciscans reported on missionary work there. After many delays, Oñate left Zacatecas on April 30th, 1598, with missionaries, colonists, and soldiers. They crossed the Rio Grande at El Paso del Norte, now Ciudad Juarez. They met many Pueblo villages and set up the colony's base in the San Juan Pueblo, just north of present-day Santa Fe. Oñate explored beyond New Mexico. His scouts went as far as present-day Texas and Arizona. At the same time, Franciscans built missions to help with colonization. In December 1598, Captain Juan de Zaldivar visited the Acoma Pueblo, west of the colony's nucleus. The Acomas accused one of Zaldivar's soldiers of kidnapping and attacking an Acoma woman. They killed Zaldivar and nearly a dozen of his men. A punishment expedition followed, resulting in hundreds of Acomas being killed and the rest imprisoned. Men over 25 were mutilated, and all prisoners were sentenced to decades of labor. Oñate sought wealth and a route to the sea for the Spanish colony. In 1601, he set out for Quivira. Despite many hardships, including bad weather and little food, Oñate led his men across the Great Plains towards Quivira. They followed the Canadian River through the Texas Panhandle to near the Oklahoma border. In central Kansas, they found several Quivira villages, but, like Coronado, they did not find the riches they hoped for and went back to New Mexico, which was deteriorating into an increasingly worse state due to poor land, resistance from native peoples, and a lack of silver. In 1606, King Philip III called Oñate to Mexico City for investigation. Oñate resigned as governor in 1607 due to the colony's poor state and money problems. He stayed in New Mexico long enough to see the new capital, Santa Fe, established near San Juan Pueblo. In 1613, the Spanish government accused Oñate of using too much force during the Acoma massacre, executing mutineers and deserters, and adultery. Oñate was fined, banned from Mexico City for 4 years, and permanently banned from New Mexico. He later moved to Spain, where the king had made him a mining inspector. Juan de Oñate died in Spain in 1626. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. In doing so, he brought with him several hundred years of death, conquest, and destruction to the indigenous peoples of the New World. The religious fervor and lust for gold that the Spanish brought with them translated into the annihilation of countless indigenous civilizations. The seemingly endless silver and gold deposits that they would find in the mountains fueled the Spanish Empire, but it also became a leading factor in its decline. And in the act of extracting precious metals and valuable cash crops, Spain and Portugal enslaved any indigenous worker spared by disease and worked them to mutilation and death. If they weren't dying, then their culture and religions were being supplanted and infused with European and Catholic ones. Even after securing hegemony in the Americas, Spanish greed prompted countless conquistadors to scour the mainland for more people to conquer, and just like Columbus, brought with them death, conquest, and destruction to previously unmolested lands. The Spanish conquest of the Americas became a leading factor in allowing the Europeans to become the preeminent and most powerful continent in the world, in a time where the civilizations and societies of China and India were considered the most advanced for centuries prior. However, it came at the cost of millions of deaths by guns, germs, and steel. The Spanish Empire in the mainland Americas would completely liberate itself by 1833, with iconic figures like Simón Bolívar, Miguel Hidalgo, and José de San Martín answering the call of freedom and liberty, as Spain had long been plagued by decline, corruption, and invasion. The disastrous 30 Years' War and the War of the Spanish Succession dethroned Spain as the dominant power in Europe. Even despite reforms, Spain remained eclipsed by its neighbors leading into the 20th century. Spain's last colonial strongholds in the Americas, in the form of Cuba and the Caribbean colonies, ended in 1898 with the Spanish-American War. Similarly, Portugal also lost its American colony of Brazil in 1824. Nonetheless, signs of their presence remain as the people of Latin America still speak Spanish and Portuguese, still practice the Catholic faith, and live in cities and countries established and named by the Spanish and Portuguese, many of these places immortalizing the invaders that established them. And even despite the conquests, the diseases, the genocides, the countless years of brutal subjugation, the indigenous of the Americas still hang on still celebrating their cultures and traditions and heritages.